Thanks for tuning in to Ducks Digest. We have some big news to get into today. The Ducks landed another huge commitment on the recruiting trail, four-star offensive lineman Dave Iuli. I just wanted to hop on this and, just break down kind of all the impacts and, what went into this. So I'm joined by Ducks Digest reporter Dylan Reubenking. Dylan, you were the lead insider for us on this one. You were really plugged in. So I just kind of wanted to ask you, how do you kind of react to this? And, ultimately, how did Oregon get this done?
Yeah, Dave Iuli is a huge pickup for Oregon. I thought from after our conversation that it was between Oregon, USC, and Washington. As he's from Puyallup, I thought top two would have been Oregon and Washington. Turned out it was Oregon and USC. He loved his visit in USC. So in the back of my head, I was kind of like, I feel like USC, like if Oregon's going to lose this, it's probably going to be USC. Given how UW hasn't really done that great so far, and USC's had a really solid class. But I think with Oregon, he wanted to stay relatively close to Washington. He told me, staying loyal and having his family be there to support him was a big part of it. He said that they're thrilled with the decision, and obviously the Oregon coaching staff is as well. He said Alex Mirabal was the biggest factor in him coming to Oregon. He was his first phone call when he made the decision. And then Coach Cristobal was number two. And he told me Coach Cristobal couldn't stop screaming when he was on the phone. He said Mirabal was a little more relaxed, but still excited and ready to get to work. So, they put in a lot of effort getting a guy from Washington, from Pac-12 country. Dave Iuli is going to be a huge, huge piece for the Oregon offense.
You talk about how the Ducks were able to beat out USC. Now the second time already in the 2022 class that they've done that. Obviously they brought in Isaiah Satania, just a little bit ago, less than a week ago, and that came down to Oregon and USC as well. We're going to talk about Iuli's kind of impact and, what he brings to the table. But before we get to that, I just kind of want to talk about the significance of beating USC for another, top tier talent on the West Coast. What kind of thoughts do you have there?
Yeah, I think overall, you think about the Pac-12 and the last decade and a half, maybe even 2 decades, USC has kind of reigned supreme, especially in the recruiting ranks, right? And so taking a guy who USC has been heavily recruiting, he said USC was one of those at the top that had his number. I think taking someone who has that interest across the Pac-12 even is really impressive. And the fact that they took him from Washington, from 40 miles from Seattle, I think it's really, really impressive. And Oregon, I think, can recruit as good as anybody. They can recruit anybody from anywhere. And even within the Pac-12, we've talked about it before, how they can take guys from Texas, from SEC country. And I think it's just as important to get guys from neighboring states as well, especially when you have teams on the rise like USC and Washington, and even Cal. Dave Iuli was talking about the Cal visit as well. So Oregon, I think, they've blown up in this recruiting ranks. They were right there with USC and UCLA for a while, and now it's just, they're running away with it. So, Iuli's just another big addition. And I think Oregon's going to come out on top pretty easily in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I know that, you talked to Iuli multiple times. I think the first time that you talked to him, it was actually, just on the heels of that trip to Los Angeles. We know that they were number 2, but I kind of just wanted to hear it from you. What was USC kind of bringing to the table, and, how real of a threat do you think they were?
I think they were a big one, especially because he was talking about the NFL production side of it, and USC produces a lot of offensive linemen. Oregon's actually produced more in the last 4 years when Cristobal's been in town. But overall, they have a great history of it, especially this last year, sending, I think, 2 first-round offensive linemen this year in the last 2 years. But in terms of like the business side of it, he said he's going into business marketing. That's his major. He was talking about visiting the Lundquist College at Oregon and talking about the NIL a little bit and how Oregon and Nike kind of, sparked his interest a bit. And USC is right there, right? USC's got a great brand for the NIL. They're probably drawing in a lot of guys based on that alone. And he was talking about how, it's crazy being able to make money, be in Los Angeles, play for such a brand like that. But I think Oregon actually came out on top in terms of the NIL because of Nike. He said he wanted the sponsorship from Nike if possible. He said he's going to start kind of small because you have to kind of work your way up through, the small markets. You can't really take that huge step right away. But he said that's on his list is to get going in the NIL process early, but obviously building the relationship with the coaches and the players was his top priority.
It's wild to think about how NIL is kind of coming into the picture here. And, I think Oregon players, they're starting to, we've seen some of them start to announce these deals, but, recruits are, telling us in these interviews, like, yeah, like Nike is really a factor there. And especially when you talk about what USC brings to the table in the form of Hollywood, you see their graphics, their visits. People are on like, the Hollywood like movie set kind of chairs. Like, I think that's a huge reason that they're, getting the momentum that they have now. Oregon's just kind of blown the doors off of everything now. But, when they were really riding high, I think a huge part of that is because they're selling their USC brand again, the Hollywood Boulevard. And to think that, Oregon and the Nike connection, they're two totally different areas, right? You got LA, bright lights, major sports, professionally and college at the college level. And then you got small town Eugene, like an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Portland, and Nike's having some sway.
Absolutely. I mean, Nike, so many guys in high school, they rock Nike. They're already working with them. High school uniforms are all decked out in Nike. And you see how much money that people, you hear about Phil Knight and how much money he gives into Oregon and their athletics and their academics, right? So, and just overall, like you see the uniforms, right? I mean, I think that's something I've heard from recruits. It's like you see those uniforms and you're like, man, that's special. And I think another thing in terms of that was Oregon's Polynesian culture, seeing the Ohana uniforms. Dave Iuli said that that was one of his favorite things was to be able to see those on the field and, just being able to see Penei Sewell and Joe Salavea and the coaching staff and all that Polynesian culture. I think the NIL and that part of it, the Polynesian culture, those were two really big factors as well. And Dave Iuli ended up being a Duck.
Absolutely. There's not a single detail when it comes to recruiting that Mario Cristobal is not thinking about. When it came down to brainstorming those uniforms, and I'm not saying he designed them per se, but I mean, I bet he was thinking about kind of what, maybe what impacts it would have down the line. They had Noah Sewell and Andrew Fowler, Cyrus Bibilikio. They had them, rocking the uniforms when they were, marketing it and debuting them. So that's all a huge part, So let's kind of ramp things up a little bit here. We got the immediate reaction. And then we also kind of talked about USC being a player, but I'm going to try to do something a little different here. If you're on YouTube, you will see it. We're going to try to look at some of Iuli's highlights, bring some of those up and talk about his impact. So, we saw everything, as far as how big of a win it was for Oregon when it comes to recruiting. But let's talk a little bit about kind of what kind of skill set he brings to the table. If you flipped on his highlights, he's another massive body. When you're looking at these Oregon highlights for the offensive linemen, basically every time you look at it, it's the Oregon commits or the Oregon targets are the biggest ones on the field. But Dylan, I kind of wanted to talk to you, get your perspective. What do you kind of think he's bringing to the table as far as from a film standpoint?
Yeah, I think, with Huddle, they show you the little arrow where he's at. I think, honestly, if you just watch that offensive line, you will see one guy stand out in all these highlights. Now, granted, they'll take these because they're his highlights, but I think in terms of physicality, he's elite. I think in terms of his hands, he's fantastic with his hands. It's absolutely phenomenal where his hand placement is and control and strength. It seems like he knows where to go every time that he jumps off the line. He can overwhelm and kind of disorient a defender right as soon as he makes contact, which and I've watched a lot of the guys, especially in Washington State on the offensive line. And I don't think I've really seen that, in all these highlights. I watch his hands and it blows me away every time. And I think that's kind of an underrated aspect to guys in high school. I mean, this is just his junior year, so he's got one more year to get even better. But he can bowl defenders over. I mean, even if he gets beat on the jump, I've seen a couple of these when I was watching earlier. It might actually be this one that's coming up. He kind of gets beat and then he just bowls the guy over. It's really impressive. He didn't get a great jump. He's not the quickest guy off the line, kind of like what we were talking about with Kelvin Banks. But he can just bowl guys over and keep them on the ground. I think like he had to have played wrestling in high school or in middle school or something, because he's really good at keeping guys on the ground and just pinning them there.
Yeah, no, yeah, all great points. I don't want to repeat too much of what you said. So, I mean, I think, the violence that he plays with is certainly one of the biggest things that stands out. I'm gonna kind of go back to look at, obviously he's not the perfect prospect. So, kind of wanted to talk about, maybe some areas for improvement. You said his speed isn't all there, but, certainly that can change once you get him in a college strength and conditioning program. And then kind of going along with that, his mobility. But I feel like, kind of makes up for that with, his smarts and the tenacity that he plays with. And, just absolutely striking guys super, super strong. Like this highlight that we watched here, I feel like he didn't have the best jump and, sliding on his protection. And it's worth saying that he's, a lot of these highlights are with him at left tackle. But, he's listed as an interior offensive lineman on a majority of the recruiting services. So I think what I'm saying is, he can kind of make up for some of those areas that maybe he's a little bit lacking in now. But, you get him under Cristobal and Mirabal, combine that with Feld, and just, the competition that the guy's going to be around when he gets to Oregon based on how they've been recruiting, and, everything is lining up to be in his favor.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things I noticed was that some of the pass defense schemes that he went up against, they had the edge rusher play off the line a little bit. He wasn't right up on the line. He was a few feet back. So Iuli didn't have to make contact right away, especially playing on the left tackle, playing against edge rushers. So I think that's going to be an adjustment, especially if he plays at guard, is, being able to have that quick jump and constantly be able to make instant contact at the snap. I think he has the athleticism to do it, but I think, he could keep grinding and kind of getting a jump on his man. And we're talking about, he's a junior in high school. So, one more year in high school. And then, you talked about getting to college and working with Alex Mirabal and getting up against those guys on the defense. He's got a long way to go. And, I don't think some of these highlights, that some of the things we talked about are like any slack on him per se, because, playing at left tackle and then moving to guard it's a bit different, especially the left tackle where you're kind of protecting the blind side. So, I think, and he's also playing on the defensive line. So I think that's one thing that kind of gives him an advantage. I kind of wish he would show that same burst in the middle, on the offensive line that he would on the defensive line. Because I think playing in the middle of the defense kind of gives him the ability to, be able to have that quick contact and that quick burst right at the snap and get a quick jump. I don't really see that as much on the offensive line. Defensive line, I have from time to time in this highlight reel. There's a mix in here. But I think that's one thing that I want to see is him be able to control guys right from the snap. When he gets a couple steps in, obviously, he's elite, but I want to see him be able to push guys right at the line right away.
Yeah, I think, he's definitely, I would say, stronger in the run game than the pass game. And, he's the kind of guy, once he gets that contact, like you're saying, if he gets his hands in the right spot, it's really hard for these defenders to recover. Let's talk a little bit about his versatility. We've been looking at a couple of highlights here when he's on defense as well. So, if the Ducks ever, needed to do that, they could potentially do it. I don't think we've seen it in a while. Jason Jones is another kind of guy that I think of on the Oregon roster that played both ways in high school and is just an absolutely massive body. But I think it's important that he, has the ability to play on the interior of the offensive line, considering that, 4 out of Oregon's 5 offensive line commits at this point are at the tackle spot. You got Kelvin Banks as the headliner, and then Cameron Williams, Michael Wooten, Percy Lewis. So definitely big for them to kind of address that need, because you don't want, a class that's just all playing, the same position. You don't get you're not really doing yourself any favors there.
Iuli told me that he wanted to start week 1 as a freshman. And I think if he wants to do that, it would be at the offensive guard position, given what you just said, that everybody else in the class is an offensive tackle. I don't think I've really seen him play center. I think it would be a left or a right guard situation. But I think in terms of run blocking, like you said, I think the Ducks run blocking is set for the next couple of years with guys like Kelvin Banks and Michael Wooten and Dave Iuli. This is kind of one of the best sets of run blockers that I've seen Oregon pick up in recent years. He can really move guys around, quickly. I think there was a play a little bit earlier, as you were talking there, where I thought he was going to move a defensive end right into the running back as he was getting the ball. But one thing that was really impressive about that play was Iuli already had control of his guy, like by the time the quarterback was extending the ball. And he just moved him to the other side of the line, and just like that. I think that's one thing that, Oregon can never have enough of. There's a lot of guys already on the roster that can move guys in a blink like that. And the run game is just that. The pass protection, not that it's worse than the run game. I just think, I think that's, like you said, I think that's one thing that he could work on, and be a little bit better at is the pass protection. But, I think he's as polished as any of the guys in this class right now. I think he's even up there with Kelvin Banks in terms of where he's at right now and what he has left to work on. Obviously, Kelvin Banks is a 5-star. Iuli's is a 4-star. We don't really go too much off of the star rankings, but I think he's still got a long way to go. But he's really, really good right now.
Yeah, you just get that guy some more development, and the limits are pretty endless. Let's see. Yeah, there was a point that I thought I wanted to make about the run game. Oh yeah, that's what it was. When you're looking at run game, I think it's almost more important for the Ducks to get good run blockers, considering how their identity has been rooted in the run game. That's not to say that Mario Cristobal wants to get away from that, because he definitely doesn't. But the stronger that you build that up, I think it'll open more opportunities to get more creative in the pass game with play actions, read options, run pass options. So it all kind of adds up. Let's talk about Oregon's presence in the state of Washington and kind of just some more recruiting kind of headlines that come out of this. It's probably not too much of a big take to say that Oregon's probably wrapped up at offensive line for this class, with the one exception probably being Josh Connerly from Seattle. I think that's the one guy that you maybe make some room for. Where I think the sweet spot for this class is right around 22, 23 guys. So you don't want to go too crazy on the offensive line, considering that they still need help at corner and wide receiver as well. So let's just talk about Oregon's presence in Washington. What do you kind of have to say there?
Yeah, so me being a Washington guy, I'm from Lacey and I live in Yelm, so I've kind of followed Washington recruiting a little bit more closely. And when I was kind of pulling together some nuggets for the story I put up on Dave Iuli, was that he's the highest rated Duck commit from Washington since Jonathan Stewart back in 2005. So, and he broke all sorts of records at running back and was obviously an incredible talent at running back for Oregon. But I think Iuli was the first 4 or 5-star that they've picked up since, from the state of Washington. So their presence hasn't really been dominant in the state of Washington. Usually you see that dominance in California or even Nevada, if you want to stay close to that West Coast, western part of the United States. I think California is where they've kind of made a name for themselves under Cristobal in terms of Pac-12 recruiting. I think this commitment with Iuli kind of sends a message a little bit, because Washington has made this identity of trying to get guys home, keep guys home in Seattle and the area. And we've seen a couple guys leave from the state of Washington and go elsewhere in the last couple of years, especially in the Jimmy Lake area. It seems like they don't really pull in as many in-state guys as you would think they would, given that's kind of what they're shooting for. And especially having a guy like Iuli go to Oregon, that's one of their top rivals, especially in the same division. I think it sends a message like, you may be right there, but we're still in it.
Yeah, no, Mario Cristobal is not going to stop at anything, and we've learned that time and time again. I think that this is even more important when you look at the Ducks' presence in California. That's awesome, and that's definitely proven to be the foundation of our classes a lot in the years past. But not right now. Especially with the Texas guys and multiple guys in Alabama. I think when you look at programs like from the SEC and the Big Ten and the Big 12 coming into California so much, you really can't push all your chips into one state. And especially with the state of Oregon, not to slack them or anything, but they don't put out the same kind of talent that these other big states do on a consistent basis. We had Keith Brown last year. He was an awesome talent. Talanoa Hufanga, he's I believe he was from Corvallis, I want to say, but I know he was definitely an Oregon guy. He's on the Niners now. But I think, the Ducks they're still, in on some guys here in Washington, on top of Josh Connerly. In addition to Josh Connerly, I should say, you have a wide receiver, Tobias Merriweather. Ducks are still looking to maybe get one or two more big names at wide receiver. He's kind of looking like a Notre Dame trend right now. And then Andrew Savanea, I hope I said that right. He's another defensive lineman. Ducks have two right now, but, certainly it doesn't look like they're totally wrapped up as far as Washington goes.
Yeah, I think 7A is probably where I would put, if I was the Ducks coaching staff, I think that's where I'd put my chips. Like you said, Merriweather, I believe he didn't take a visit to Oregon. And I know that, like you said, Notre Dame's kind of been trending. Notre Dame's kind of been taking some guys that Oregon's had their eyes on. So, I think 7A is a good one because I believe he visited. And like you said, the defensive line need is a good one. They also are looking at, like, outside of Washington, Anthony Lucas is a big one on the defensive line. Quincy Wiggins is another one. So I think that's a big one. It would be 7A for sure. But I think in terms of, like, positions that Oregon needs, I think they really need to go defensive back, primarily cornerback. And then, like you said, wide receiver. I don't think Merriweather's probably going to Oregon. Probably not even the Pac-12. I would say Notre Dame has probably got him on lock, but we'll see. I think McMillan or Brennan Thompson should be the top two guys that Oregon's looking at. And I think they're in a really good running for both of them.
Yeah, let's kind of wrap this thing up a little bit. Let's talk about the Jimmy Lake kind of impact of all this, with the Ducks coming in and taking some of that top talent, out of the state. Worth mentioning here that the Huskies do have two in-state commits in the class of 2022 with Chance Bogan from Tacoma and Vega Ione. I hope that's how I said it, from Graham, Washington. But, they had one of their biggest names from Washington, Malik Agbo. He's an offensive lineman from Federal Way. He has a top five that didn't include Washington or Oregon, and they were both, in on his recruitment. It's, Jimmy Lake, I think, he clearly has an uphill battle when it comes to recruiting. But, for a while, during the Chris Peterson era, there was some battles between Washington and Oregon that, the Huskies were winning. Cam Williams, the safety, is, one of the ones that kind of comes to mind. He was a safety that was committed to Oregon, backed off, and now he's playing in Seattle.
Yeah, and you mentioned, like, Elijah Molden was another one, an Oregon guy, I believe from West Lynn, that area, Portland area, I believe. And so that was one I know Oregon fans really wanted to get right from their country. But, another guy that we should mention is JT Tuimoloau. He was a Washington guy. A lot of Husky fans thought he was a lock to be a Husky, and then it just kind of trended to Ohio State. It's been that way for probably close to 2 years. And then, his teammate G. Scott went to Ohio State from the same high school. And then it was like, well, I think it's kind of a lock. Oregon made a crazy push. And some people thought that, maybe they did enough, and it wasn't for a lack of effort, but it was Ohio State all along, it appeared. So, it's been kind of an underwhelming recruiting couple of years for Jimmy Lake. I think they're sitting at like in the 7-8 area in the Pac-12 right now. Now, there's a lot of talented coaches in the Pac-12 and recruiting staffs in the Pac-12. I think we should give some love to, because obviously you talk about, like, Arizona State with Herm Edwards. That school is kind of on the rise. They kind of underwhelmed last year, but I think this year could be a bounce back year. I think UCLA is on the way up. You have Chip Kelly there. USC, I think they've got a short window now that, it's kind of Pac-12 championship, college football playoff or nothing for them as well, kind of like Oregon. Stanford, Cal kind of still hanging around. Colorado's hanging around. So, there's a lot of attractive programs in the Pac-12. And, I think it's been tough for Jimmy Lake so far to keep guys in his home state, like he said before when he got hired.
Absolutely. Looks like the Ducks, they have some names that are currently committed to Washington, as far as recruits go, that they might still try to pursue. Biggest name that kind of stands out right now is Ben Roberts, defensive lineman from Salt Lake City. But yeah, lots of great stuff. Dylan, before we get out of here, where can people find more of you if they want to, read more about you or just see more of your stuff?
Yeah, so my Twitter is at DRK Sports News. My Instagram is at Dylan Reubenking, my name with no space, no hyphen. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. It's just my first and last name. And shoot me a follow, tweet at me, and let's have some fun.
Right on. Good stuff, man. You can find more of my work. You can find me on Twitter at mtorresports. And you can also find more of my work on Ducks Digest. And looks like we'll try to get this on the YouTubes as well. So shoot me a subscription over there so you don't miss out on the latest Oregon Ducks news. But that's all we had for this one. Thanks for tuning in.